Autism is very Autism is very much our kind of origin and our expertise. But I just want to highlight to start this presentation that, I'll use the word autism a lot throughout this presentation, but you could absolutely interject intellectual and developmental disabilities, ADHD, neurodivergence. These tools that I'm going to kind of share with you have very much universal application. They're going to work with a lot of our population, even folks, that have TBI or PTSD. Some of these tools I'm going to share with you today are very much applicable to those audiences as well. So I just wanted to kind of preface with that. Just have a short window of time with you guys today and kind of have a lot I want to cover. A big goal for this 30 minutes is to help us as a community better understand a pretty specific problem that affects people with autism and intellectual developmental disabilities, so that we can empathize with these individuals in our community and really, share compassion with them. So that we can collaborate as a community, which is really why I'm here with you today, is just getting our wheels turning about autism and IDD and how that shows up in various capacities, so that we can continue to do the best we can to protect, all of our people, all of our community members, and especially these, very special community members that, that need a little extra protection. And so with that, I want to start by just kind of starting to highlight a pretty specific problem, and we'll kind of extrapolate from there. So just to get your attention a little bit here, people with autism are 3 times more likely to die from injury compared to their neurotypical or typically developing counterparts. Under the age of 15, it's 40 times more likely that people with autism are going to die from an injury than somebody that's typically developing. Injury, which includes drowning and poisoning, are the leading cause of death for people with autism. People with autism are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than their neurotypical counterparts. And people with autism are 160 times more likely to die from drowning compared to typically developing counterparts. So the National Autism Association put out a study. It's a 5-year study spanning from 2011 to 2017. And they're looking at this very specific risk of wandering and elopement. Essentially, half of all people on the autism spectrum engage in wandering and eloping behaviors, meaning that they can leave, what's a safe scene, whether they're just, kind of wandering, which is kind of more exploratory, but still leaving that safe scene, or this concept of elopement, which is, they're leaving this safe scene to get somewhere that they are drawn to, or to escape or avoid something that they're trying to get away from. And so during this 5-year study, just to kind of highlight, when a number of these wandering and elopement incidences take place, 39% of these took place during transitions, commotions, stress. Vacations come into that, which is why we work heavily throughout the state of Colorado. I know all of us see a lot of tourism, and those are prime environments for these wandering and elopement incidents to take place. The incidents will often take place between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. when caregivers are asleep. They'll take place during unfamiliar settings, playing outside, family and social gatherings. Along this study, the same study from the Autism Association just showed that, where are these incidences happening, and how frequently are they lethal? And again, you can see the home setting is the highest occurrence. And of course, that's where, people with IDD and autism are spending most of their time. So it makes sense that, the highest number of incidents are taking place from that home setting. But other really critical environments that these wandering and elopement incidences that are happening, which, as the statistics show, all too often these can lead to very tragic outcomes. They're happening at schools at pretty high incidence, at relatives or friends' houses, during outdoor recreation, field trips, and camp. hotel and vacation. When they happen in hotels and vacation homes, during this study, there was a 50% fatality rate. So if a person with autism or IDD wanders away from their home or a controlled setting, it can very quickly turn into a very urgent or emergent situation, which is why we want to, get out and connect with all the different levels of the community to kind of educate on this specific topic. We recognize that this is a community issue, and so we're really working at all levels of the community. We work closely with families and schools and teachers to try to prevent wandering and elopement incidents from happening. We're working with first responders in Garfield County and Pitkin County and hopefully even further, so that they better understand how to respond when there is a person with autism that's missing, wandering, and eloping. Here in where we live in Carbondale, we've had a couple incidents that involved, mountain rescue and the fire department. One involved a raging river, and as you can see, the incidents can get intense very quickly. And then we're also working with law enforcement, those officers that are going to be responding to these types of calls and incidents. And the next tier for us is wanting to engage with you folks representing 911 and operators, and really trying to tie these pieces together so that we kind of create a web of safety, or what we call a spectrum of safety with these different tiers of support. It's important to note that of all these fatalities in this study, half of them occurred in under 1 hour. So time can be very critical when a person with autism or IDD has wandered or eloped. Traffic accidents account for 18% of these wandering and elopement fatalities. So I just want to highlight that, that's common occurrence is, a family's in a car accident and everybody's kind of panicked and frazzled. And next thing you know, the young person with autism is, they're in a state of fight or flight. They're nervous, they're scared, their nervous system is triggered, and they leave that scene and ultimately, can find themselves in a real hazardous situation quickly. And so with all that, when there's a missing person or a wandering elopement case, we've found through the research and the studies and our understanding that, identifying the bodies of water is really critical. As mentioned in the first slide, it's 160 times more likely that a person with autism will drown compared to their neurotypical counterparts. And the reasons for that is, a person with autism might have an impaired sense of danger. They might not understand the risks associated with, some of the bodies of water we have here in Colorado that are cold and moving rapidly. And, they might associate, their pool at home with something tranquil and peaceful. And, when their nervous system has been hijacked and they're in that state of fight or flight, they're oftentimes drawn to these bodies of water because they tend to, enjoy water, and it tends to be something tranquil for them. But as we all know very well, bodies of water, especially in Colorado, can be extremely dangerous. So let's see here. And so with all of this, and why I'm here today, Ascendigo has partnered with the Department of Justice as a part of a grant program called the Kevin and Avante program that is specifically looking at reducing injury and death of missing individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And if you can see my little graphic there in my map of all the recipients across the country, Ascendigo is one of the very few in the Western United States and the only one in Colorado. And so we have a lot of work to do. And that's really why I come to you guys today. We're only going to kind of skim the surface in the short time we have together today. But Ascendigo has developed a robust curriculum around how best to support and protect people with autism. And we have different levels of that curriculum. We target, as I said, schools and teachers with one aspect of our curriculum, but we have both online and in-person trainings developed for law enforcement, first responders, 911 operators, to really get the full picture of best practices for supporting people with autism in the community. And, it's our mission to get that, information in as many hands as we can across the state. So Daryl has, my contact information and has a flyer. Again, we'll only skim the surface today, but if there's anything we can do to support you all in your training efforts around people with autism, intellectual developmental disabilities, TBI, PTSD, even things like dementia and Alzheimer's, we have, curriculum and training solutions ready to go to support you guys in that. And we would love to partner in getting you those resources. So how is Ascendigo helping? I pretty well just covered it. We consider this a spectrum of safety. There's kind of 3 tiers to us providing training, education, and resources within the community, starting at that family level, the teachers and school district level, first responders, 911 operators, and law enforcement. And we think if we can, come together and collaborate and share ideas with all those stakeholders and user groups, then we will have done a lot to help protect people with autism across the state of Colorado. Just so you have a better idea of who Ascendigo is and what we do, I'm going to play a quick video for you. If it's a little long, I may cut it short, but we'll just take a quick peek at Ascendigo.
Nothing great was ever accomplished without enthusiasm. And I think that is inherent in this process. We elevate the spectrum because of the enthusiasm of the people that are behind it.
Ascendigo is a place where a child can shadow the expectation for themselves, their families, and the community at large. It really is that, and it's striving to be that in so many ways, of raising the bar.
Tyler, thank you for moving so efficiently today.
As a family, we've been through this before with a very unhappy ending. And this is, in that sense, a great relief to me that there is hope, there is a future. This child can be a functioning member of society. Without Ascendigo, I wouldn't have had that.
Ascendigo is about creating an opportunity for individuals that have autism and their families to realize their potential. It's to help them ascend to a place that perhaps they never thought that they could go to before. Or someone coming here for our summer camp, or someone deciding to live here full time, we make a profound difference in their life. And we can't continue to do this mission unless we continue to have more support, more donors, more people who can help us make this difference. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're about.
We can't change. That's when I realized that that's where I want to work. I describe Ascendigo.
Okay, just gonna cut that short just for the sake of time here today. Just wanted to, it's a lot easier to understand what we're up to when you see it than me just sitting here speaking to it. But as you can see, Ascendigo's engaged in a very rural part of Colorado. We're out, creating memories and creating a really meaningful life for people with autism. And with that absolutely comes risk. I think all of us know that, we live in Colorado because we have access to, the backcountry and nature and all these amazing outdoor recreation activities. And, Ascendigo is very much leading the effort across the country at saying, people with autism and IDD deserve access to this quality of life as well. And with that comes tremendous risk. And that's why we feel like if we're going to be pushing the envelope in terms of integrating people with autism into all aspects of the community and this quality of life, we have to be equally as proactive in pursuing safety measures and collaborating as a statewide community to really support folks on the autism spectrum when things are going well and when things get challenging. So I want to spend a few minutes and just share a little bit about the autism spectrum and some characteristics and some things you guys may have heard or may be new to you. But the autism spectrum at the highest level, generally speaking, the diagnostic criteria that doctors are looking at is differences in three main areas, and those areas are socialization. So people with autism tend to socialize differently than their typically developing counterparts. Communication, people with autism tend to communicate differently. And restrictive and repetitive behavior patterns, which kind of takes on two meanings. The first one is kind of that stereotypical, the rocking, the hand flapping, the twisting, the ear pinching. We call that self-stimulatory behavior. It's very repetitive. It's a telltale sign that somebody's on the autism spectrum. So it's something that you can look out for. And as well as people with autism within this restrictive and repetitive behavioral patterns, they tend to be very routine based. Change is very difficult for them. They tend to, hyper focus on a couple subjects very, very intensely. And many other things are very foreign to them and very difficult for them. And they have these kind of restricted, repetitive, hyper focused routines and behaviors. And so those are kind of the three main characteristics that people with autism are accompanied by. But there's many other qualities that typically present in a person with autism: sensory processing and sensory sensitivity, and by that meaning sensitivity to lights and sounds. We call that heightened exteroception. Is another one. And what's meant by this graphic is, for many years the autism spectrum was kind of defined linearly with high functioning on one side and low functioning on the other side, and folks that fell somewhere in the middle of that. And by this graphic, we're really trying to illustrate that it's very much not linear. You might have somebody that has very difficult time communicating verbally, but they might be a genius at programming computer code, or a person that struggles with activities of daily living. Maybe they're still not brushing their teeth independently, or we work with folks that aren't, their bathroom hygiene's not independent. They're not wiping independently. They need help with even as mundane tasks as that. And some of these same folks that need help brushing their teeth, again, have gifts in areas like computer programming or maybe something less flashy than that. But it's just this point that, just because somebody is, has real challenges in one area, we can't generalize and assume that means they're low functioning across the board. It just really is incredibly varied how it presents. And so it's really difficult to make generalizations and assumptions about people on the autism spectrum. So we'll continue on. As you've probably heard in the news, autism prevalence is absolutely on the rise. We just put this graphic in here a year ago, and it's already completely out of date. As of 2023, the CDC is saying 1 in 38 children are on the autism spectrum. That's about 3% of the population. Meanwhile, about 10% of the population is ADHD. When you start to add in things like OCD, and some of these other neurological conditions, you can see that a really high percentage of the population is facing some level of neurodivergence and neurological difference in wiring. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And, there's some cities, Seattle in particular, as well as New Jersey, where their local studies are showing numbers on the autism spectrum that are even closer to 1 in 10. And, I think there's theories as to why that some of these city centers are having these really insane levels of precedence. We know that autism is both a genetic and environmental causative disorder. By that meaning there's a genetic component that's passed down, but we know that there's also an environmental component that kind of triggers and exacerbates some of the symptomology. And so, we can theorize that, in these population centers where there's increased pollution and air pollution, water pollution, we can easily start to theorize that that's contributing to some of the greater increase in prevalence. Let's see. So it's interesting to note that right now 4 times as many boys are diagnosed as girls, but that probably has more to do with misdiagnosis than accurate prevalence. We're finding that it often presents different in females than it does in males. And we'll save unpacking that for another time. Oftentimes people with autism, it's accompanied by other comorbidity, other medical and mental health issues accompany autism. It's rarely just autism in and of itself. Some of those include gastrointestinal disorders. That's very, very common. Seizures, sleep disturbance, ADHD, anxiety, OCD, depression, phobias, etc. And, why is that important to us? I'm going to get into, how this starts to touch you guys and more so your teams, if I understand correctly, the folks that are taking the calls that, that you're helping oversee. Just why is comorbidities important to that is, people with autism can often struggle to communicate what their needs are and what's bothering them. And it's really common to have these really severe gastrointestinal challenges accompanying autism spectrum. And, those can include, extreme constipation is the norm. I work with guys that, may not have a bowel movement for over a week. And you can just start to imagine that if you have if you have difficulty in communicating what your needs are, and you haven't had a bowel movement in over a week and you're terribly in distress and discomfort, and you don't have a whole lot of words at your disposal, you could see how making a 911 call for a person with autism could be really, really difficult. And, it's kind of up to us to try to, stay calm and get all the information we can and really try to unpack what is the actual picture. And, just understanding some of these setting and comorbidities can help you have a better understanding of, what are the needs and what's the real truth in this call that is coming through, and how can I best support this person. It's worth noting that autism is more common in children than cancer, than AIDS, than muscular dystrophy, than Down syndrome, than cerebral palsy. In fact, it's more common than all of those combined. So it's, it's something that, and you guys wouldn't have brought me in if you didn't, have the care in your heart as well. But it's something that with prevalence the way it is, especially when you consider all the other neurodivergent categories, we're going to be interacting with neurodivergent people. And so it just only makes sense to get some training and better understand them, because it's inevitable that we're going to have interactions with folks that are neurodivergent. So rather than me just keep telling you about autism, I'm going to take a little 2.5-minute video here for you to take a look at what autism can look like and how it can present.
Six, 7, 8, 9.
Take my hand.
not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
So as you can kind of see in that video, living with autism can be a very, challenging experience. And, as you can see from that video, people with autism carry a heavy burden. Society isn't designed for people on the autism spectrum. The simplest day-to-day interactions can be very difficult and overwhelming, and cause what we call a meltdown, which is essentially a hijacking of the nervous system. And as we all know, that fight, flight, or freeze is the byproduct of that sympathetic nervous system activation. And so, in your work and, your colleagues' work and the 911 operators' work, there's a chance that, somebody with autism is going to call the center for help. We've had cases here locally where we have guys with autism that have called 911 and presented an emergency that actually wasn't an emergency. We had a young man here call and say, there was a intruder in the house with a gun. And of course, that's going to get 911 on absolute high alert and the responding officers. But thankfully, we had provided training to those local officers. They knew of Ascendigo, they knew of the client. And so when they showed up, they were extremely helpful. They were extremely calm. They were able to determine that the caller was on the autism spectrum. They were able to determine with some, compassionate investigation that there was no intruder, there was no gun, and they were able to educate that young man on, how important it is to respect the profession of 911 and law enforcement, and, the risks that he presented by making that call in such a way that it started to sink in with this young man. And we haven't had any of those incidents since then. We really attribute that successful outcome to the collaboration with the local law enforcement and them being receptive to the training, and just the good natured hearts of all the folks that have committed a life of service to our community. That's all of you guys and 911 operators and law enforcement. We know you guys have very compassionate hearts and are in this for the right reason. And with just a little bit of training and education, we think we can create positive outcomes most of the time for people with autism and neurodivergence. I have 30 minutes and we're at 28, and I want to at least save a couple minutes here for questions. So I may just do one more slide here, and then we'll save the rest for hopefully some future training opportunities. So just some additional things about people with autism that might help you, whether they're the ones making the call, or again, you may get a call about, a man in public presenting as intoxicated, who's, acting aggressive, and et cetera, and those things might be true. He may be intoxicated. He may be presenting aggressive. And there's also a very good likelihood that there's an underlying mental health and neurodevelopmental difference in this person. So if we can use some tools and help de-escalate in those situations, I think we can often find more positive outcomes. So, people with autism might avoid eye contact and prefer to be alone. They can struggle with understanding other people's feelings. They often have delayed language development. A third of people with autism remain nonverbal for their entire lives, never speaking a word. They can mimic phrases. We call that echolalia, and you might hear that and I have a bunch of videos that I typically play that kind of show law enforcement interacting with people with autism, and they're presenting in this echolalia. And what that'll look like is, the person, the officer might say, what are you up to? What are you doing here? And the person with autism might say, what are you up to? What are you doing here? And they're just kind of repeating you. And for a law enforcement officer who has a very intense job, that can feel very rude and insulting to, it feels like they're being mocked, but really that's just how that person communicates. And there's no ill will intended. It's just how they're trying to process the information that's happening in the environment. And along with that is this concept of scripting, where they might be trying to communicate with you, but it might sound like scripts from a cartoon or a movie or a TV show or something they've picked up. Scripting can be very functional. So again, it might sound like a line from a movie that maybe you've even heard before, but they might be trying to tell you something. So again, it really takes an artful ear to really try to decipher what people with autism are trying to communicate with us. They can have often unusual and intense reactions to sounds, smells, tastes, textures that can present as fear, anger, agitation, or happiness. And oftentimes people with autism can shut down if we, if we present loud speech. It can be pretty common where if somebody doesn't respond initially, that we just try to raise our voice and see if that gets compliance. But with people with autism or TBI or other conditions, that can have the opposite effect. So often taking a calm, more quiet tone. And people with autism often have delayed auditory processing, meaning it may literally take them 30 seconds to process the simplest question you've asked them, such as, are you here with any family members or friends or care providers? It may take them 10, 15, 30 seconds to just process that very simple question. And then they might say, no, just all alone by myself or something along those lines. But if we don't give them that time, we're just going to create power struggles because it's physiological. They can't respond quicker if they wanted to. I've had clients I've worked with that I've asked questions to them and didn't get an answer. So I just kind of gave them some compassion and a fist bump and just said hello. And 24 hours later, they came up and answered a question that I'd asked them the day before. It took them that long to process. So, if it's a caller with a caller with autism calling into 911, they may not be able to understand the true danger or identify a true emergency, or it's possible they could even be perseverating and creating it in their own mind. They might be unfamiliar with common safety rules and expectations. They could have trouble handling disorderly or disruptive situations. They might have difficulty understanding questions or instructions. They can get confused by figures of speech or slang. They may not be able to respond quickly. They may become increasingly anxious, and they may not understand the consequences of their actions and the culpability associated with what they're doing. So this will be the last slide here. We encourage anybody that's interacting with people with autism, whether they're calling you or your officers are responding to the field with somebody that may be on the autism spectrum. The first thing is slow down, take a deep breath, regulate our own nervous system. The current research shows very clearly that, when a law enforcement officer is interacting with a person, that their nervous systems are actually influencing one another. And so, that person with autism is going to be in fight or flight. They have overactive nervous systems, and that's going to influence the officer. The officer and the 911 operator, their nervous system is going to be influenced by this triggered person. So the first thing we can do as therapists or law enforcement is take a deep breath, regulate our own nervous system, and allow that the research calls it physiological linkage, which you can do a deep dive in if you're interested, and allow that physiological linkage to have a calming effect over this person with autism or TBI or whatever it may be. Be patient, revisit your last comment, give a lot of time to process, use simple concrete sentences with a kind voice, avoid abstract language, smile, it will change your tone. We like to give really simple choices, A or B, yes or no. Is it your arm or your leg that's hurt? If you give open-ended questions to people with autism, a lot of times you'll get almost nothing in return, or it can just add to their anxiety and delay their ability to regulate and get back to homeostasis. Reinforce positive responses. We call that shaping. So if they're starting to cooperate a little bit, just some positive reinforcement. Hey, thanks for talking with me. Thanks for thinking through this. Thanks for communicating. Just some fist bumps, creating some connection and trust through a little physical contact, like a fist bump or a high five. Let's see here. And, you know, lastly, just clarifying understanding. Sometimes if we provided instruction to a person with autism, that verbal instruction's often not going to sink in. I might need to model it out for them, show them a picture of somebody doing what I've asked them to do. And we have some of these tools built where if we can come out and do a training with you guys, a little deeper dive, we'll bring some tools with us that you can use with 911 operators or with the responding officers to help break down this instruction in a way that people with autism can understand. So I better stop there. I'm already over my time. I apologize for that. If anyone has any thoughts or questions, I'd love to take a moment for that. Otherwise, I'd love to hear from you guys again and see if we can't help you provide some training resources and solutions to better support these special populations. And with that, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I don't know if you could see the chats that were coming in while you were presenting, but we had several people commenting on how powerful that information is and how useful that information is. So I think you got your message across. One thing I wanted to ask is we have a committee, the Equal Access Committee, that right now one of the things they're looking at is developing training where there isn't training available out there for how to better handle 911 calls from people with varying kinds of disabilities. And as you provide this training to 911 centers, if we get any 911 centers to call you in to provide some training, I wonder if we could record that and make it available on the, we have a 911 resource center here in Colorado that we could make it available on their website so that other 911 centers could watch it on demand. I don't want to discourage anyone from getting the in-person training because that's always better, but you know, for those that can't do that, it might be a nice alternative. Do you know if that's something that could be arranged?
That's awesome. It can absolutely be arranged. And just so you guys know, 911 is kind of the last tier that we're working on here, as I explained. And so as we get a couple of these under our belt, we will develop it as e-learning specific. So it'll have the videos, you know, all of this information and more. We have that ready for the law enforcement side. It's not quite ready for the 911 side. So in time, I would say over the next 12 months or so, not only will we have like a live video recording that we could share, but we'll have online learning that we can, you know, send out to folks and really, you know, we know that it's the most effective, you know, in-person and the e-learning model, because the way we design the curriculum and it's engaging and it's got like, you know, built-in homework and things like that, we know that it will really do a good job of getting folks prepared for this. So we would love to collaborate on all of that.
And I just pulled up on the screen for everybody the flyer. This flyer is also available in the meeting folder for today that Holly sent out previously. If you don't have that folder, can't find that link again, feel free to email me and I will send this to you. Otherwise, it'll be available. It's also available on the in the meeting folder, you know, on the task force website.
Yeah, and don't hesitate to reach out, guys. We love hearing from folks. Even we can just brainstorm a question with you. We can discuss in-person training. Just really don't hesitate to reach out, big or small, whatever you're looking for. My email is going to be at the bottom here. Please just reach out and let's start a conversation. That goes a long way in kind of supporting our mission. So we really appreciate that.
Great. Any other questions for Matt? Well, thank you, Matthew. We really appreciate you presenting to us today, and hopefully we can get you hooked up with some of the 911 centers around the state to provide some in-person training.
Lovely. Thank you for that. I'll sign off now. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate you guys.
All right, this is Jennifer. So I skipped introductions. So if we could just go around the room and introduce who's in the room, and then I'll ask anybody who's on the bridge to introduce themselves if they weren't a voting member, and we'll start over here. Go ahead.
Carl Stevens, Garfield County Communications Authority.
Tracy Obermeyer, Council for Lita. Kimberly Culp with Lita. Jody Slate with Denver.
Jennifer Kirkland.
Daryl Branson, Public Utilities Commission.
Ryan Hope, Vieira Wireless.
Ron Collins, AdCom.
Penny West, Prensa.
Jeff Winkleman, Lumen.
Kevin Newton, Lumen.
Good morning, Carl Simpson, El Paso, Teller County.
Good morning, Ken Winward, Hexagon.
Becky Kamaski, Loveland Communications.
And Nick Huffman with Chaffey County.
Thank you. And then how many do we have online?
We have a good number. We've got 42 people online.
Wow, okay. Well, how about you put into chat, if you are not a voting member, go ahead and throw in chat who all's in the room, and that way we've just got a feeling for who has joined us today. So we'll move into standing reports. And as a reminder, we've moved to having these reports submitted ahead of time. So those are in the meeting materials online. But I will go down the list, and if anybody who has submitted a standing report has something specific that needs to be discussed by the group, that would be a great time to bring it up. So Daryl, PUC.
Right, so my report is in the standing report. People can read it, but I do want to ask a couple questions. One, without going into any details as to what you plan on doing related to it, I want to ask if anybody on the call today is planning on filing an intervention in the Basic Emergency Service Improvement Plan application, just so that I can help plan how that's going to go internally, procedurally. Anybody planning on filing any interventions?
This is Joe Benkert. We haven't decided yet.
Okay. And then Kimberly?
Lido or CCOA, we have our meeting next week to discuss.
Okay. Thank you. And then the other item was the Performance Assurance Plan Fund distribution. I sent out a copy of the order, which also included the deadline for comment. But because it's kind of a quick turnaround on this, I wanted to see if anybody had any questions for me today. I can't answer any questions about what types of things the commission might approve, but if you have any procedural questions, I'd be happy to answer that. And also, I did want to mention too, that you don't necessarily have to intervene in this to provide comments. The commission will consider all comments it receives, whether you intervene or not. And there are multiple ways to provide comments. So without going into what those are right now, if anybody wants to provide comments without intervening, but isn't sure how, you can email me and I will let you know, or I will send you information on how to do that. But does anybody have any procedural questions for me about that proceeding?
Daryl, this is Tracy, and not procedural questions about the CPAP proceeding, but on the improvement plan application proceeding. My understanding from yesterday was that the FCC filing that Lumen did in the miscellaneous docket, it's an annual report they file with the FCC for reliability, the certification. You need to file an NDA in the miscellaneous proceeding in order to get that, which is incorporated by reference per yesterday's ruling into the improvement plan proceeding.
Correct.
So just making sure everybody knows that if you need that additional piece of information, you have to file an NDA in the miscellaneous proceeding.
Yes, I think because he's incorporated it by reference, I'm not sure if that means that we will be moving a copy of that over into the other proceeding or not, but just to make sure, you can file an NDA in the contingency plan repository filing, so that you can see that list, because it was also one of the requirements for this proceeding, but CenturyLink didn't do it. But since it was already in another proceeding, we just referenced that one.
Exactly.
Any other questions or comments? Other than that, I think the rest of my report is fairly straightforward. There's some information about where we ended up on several pieces of state legislation. There's some updates on federal legislation and upcoming deadlines. Does anybody else have any other questions regarding the rest of my written report?
I know the inclusive language is getting signed tomorrow in Colorado Springs.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you. And Carl's referring to the bill that creates a study to look into the feasibility and funding for requiring emergency notification messages to be sent out in languages other than English under certain circumstances. And I think foreign language interpretation, live foreign language interpretation for 911 calls was also part of that study.
I had a question because the diversity plan is such a big deal.
Mhm.
I didn't know if under your report or under Lumen's BESP report, if we were gonna talk through that, not from a procedural perspective, but just kind of, was that a plan for today to hear a little bit more about the whys behind what they selected and where it's going, or just to even just walk through what it contains?
Not for me, because I'm tied up in the procedural side of it, but if Lumen wants to cover that as part of their report today, they could.
Okay.
Or, if they wanted to get into more detail, then what might be appropriate here, they could set up a separate meeting like they did with the ECATS discussions.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on my report? Okay, thank you.
This is Jennifer. Thank you, Daryl. And next up, we have Lumen.
Hi, this is Tim. Good morning. I don't have anything in addition to the few things that Daryl had mentioned. Although I don't know if you mentioned the contingency plan. I guess I don't think I saw that. So we did file the contingency plan as well, and I've seen some questions. Oh, I guess you were talking about that with the NDA. So I have seen a couple NDAs come in, so I will be forwarding those unredacted versions to folks. I will get that done today. And if you don't get something from me today, please reach out so that I make sure I capture everyone that has filed that. Kimberly, you mentioned the improvement plan, and was your question just why those were the routes that got selected as part of what we filed at NTIA at the federal level?
This is Kimberly. Tim, I guess I was just curious if Lumen was going to present, maybe walk through the plan, allow any Q&A. So if this isn't the right form for that from a task force perspective, or if we need to have a meeting minus Daryl, that could be a good idea. So the 911 authorities can just have some time to understand where Lumen's at, why those were selected, and just maybe even have a Q&A forum before comments are filed.
Sure. I mean, happy to do that separate. We can do it a little bit here too. If I don't know if that puts Daryl in a bad spot or not. I can say that we looked at a bunch of routes across the state, really across the country, and to kind of whittle it down to what we filed with NTIA for these middle mile grants. We tried to really hone in on, in Colorado specifically, on where would there be benefit to PSAPs, which is a little different than necessarily where we looked at in other states. And the reason that it looks a little different in Colorado was because of the opportunity that the state presents with covering the additional costs that NTIA doesn't cover. As we
Tim, are you going to be covering anything that's not already covered in the narrative in the application?
No.
Okay, go ahead then. Otherwise, I'll offer to step out of the room.
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate that. That's why I'm trying to be a little sensitive here. So as we explained, the FCC, or excuse me, the NTIA only covers covers 70%. I suppose there's some possibility that could cover less, but they would have reached out if they thought they would have done something less than 70. So essentially, that program covers 70% of the costs, and then with the unique opportunity that Colorado presents to cover the remainder, and to have it tied to 911, that's why some of the routes in Colorado look a little different maybe than some of the other states. And so then we just tried to zero in on where could we get some benefit to PSAPs, where we've known we've had some issues in the past for sure. So that was another key factor there. So Yuma, is at the near the end of the line, raised the end of the line of that particular piece of our network. So we've talked about this one in the past numerous times. So that's where that one came in. Of course, the the one going through the tunnel between Georgetown and Dillon. We've actually had some very recent incidents impacting that area of the state. So that one was, and we've had some past ones. So that one was why we selected that one. And then down in the southeast corner, excuse me. We haven't had too many incidents down there, but it presented a good opportunity to connect multiple PSAPs and create some ring diversity that, at least in part, like down in Springfield specifically, that was another kind of end of the line. So it created some good opportunities. And so that's why those were selected. We did look at some other ones, but we weren't going to have enough of an impact on 911 and PSAPs. And then that would have been challenging to bring them to the state for the remainder of the cost for those. So again, those are kind of the reasons why those were selected, really trying to zero in on areas we've known that have had some issues either in the past or even recently. And that would also play into the ability to make this kind of filing. We understand that this filing isn't quite what I think everybody would have thought we would have done it, including ourselves, but this opportunity, the way it developed and came along, kind of a once in a shot type of opportunity. So that's why the plan looks the way it does. Now, if and we said this in the presentation as well, in the filing as well, if NTIA doesn't support any of these or some of these, that is going to have an impact on what we go forward with, and we may just pull them back and not have the request go as 100% to the state. So I think that's something that we'll get to that when and if it happens, and frankly, if none of them come through, I think it might be reasonable to then just start the clock over again in February and not really have this count as waiting for every other year to make a filing, that we would just try it again. And it would look a lot different. It would look more like, I think, what a lot of folks probably were thinking it might look like, absent this rare opportunity. So that's a little bit of the background about how it came together and why we did it and what may transpire for that one. But I'm happy to answer any questions, or like Kimberly suggested, we certainly could have a different session that would maybe not necessarily be to respond to these 3 middle mile routes, but rather looking at the FCC filing that we had made, which in future years is very likely going to be the real basis for what our improvement plan would build from.
So this is Kimberly. Can I ask a question about timing? Okay. Daryl gave me a nod for those that so Tim, I heard that the grant should be funded in June. When is Lumen anticipating hearing if your 3 projects were selected?
That is the $1 million question right now, because they initially said they would not make any selections before March 31st. So we thought, okay, well, let's hope that means April. Didn't mean April. So now I think we're all hoping that before the end of this month, so sometime this month, they will make these determinations. There was a little bit of a factor. I don't remember what state it was, but there was some sort of hiccup that occurred. And so it delayed some submissions. And so I think that's partly why they've taken a little extra time, is they wanted to make sure they vetted these late filed ones equally with the other ones. So we're hopeful that it's May, so that we can really get to work and know what is it that we're really going forward with, and what are we really asking for at the PUC? So that's the best answer I've got on that. Hopefully this month.
And then my follow-up comment is your offer to have a meeting to go through what was filed with the FCC, I think would be fantastic. I know that it's gonna be confusing. Previous ones were a bit confusing, and so to be able to walk through them and put substance behind it would be great. So I'm sure the CCUA would appreciate that, and other members of the 911 community as well. So if you could set that up for people that have signed the NDA, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely appreciate that suggestion.
And I see Joe Benkert has his hand up.
Yeah, I have two questions. Looking at the middle mile requirements, grant program requirements, and it talked about, broadband. Is the grant application just mention 911, or are there other aspects of it that might better fit the broadband aspect of the grant program?
Well, it certainly has to tie into broadband in some capacity. And so that application at the NTIA does account for the ability to improve broadband, to bring fiber into some of these communities where we don't have it. Now, some of it, we cross some other carriers serving area, specifically up in Northeast Colorado. But it will help with backhaul and those kinds of things that are attributable to good quality high-speed broadband. So there certainly is a factor of doing that. But the real primary focus of our grant application, which again may jeopardize it in some degree, is we're really trying to focus this on 911 diversity, resiliency, and redundancy. But it will have some benefit to improving broadband in some of those communities.
I was hoping there was some of that in that application, because I was concerned otherwise that it wouldn't really fit with the program, and
right.
We want to have a project to go forward next year. Now, the other comment you made just a few minutes ago is that you might decide to pull them all back if you don't get the federal grant, and I think I would like the 911 community to have input on that decision, probably through the proceeding, but it may, we need to have improvements and get rid of single points of failure. And, we can pay you now or pay you later,
Yeah. Well, and we put this in the application. We mentioned this, and one of the factors in the rule is, well, what other things did you look at? And we didn't look at much because of the timing of these rules coming into focus, the state rules coming into focus on the ability to utilize that funding mechanism. So we felt we actually took a little bit of a leap, because the rules certainly weren't even finalized in a final proposal sense, right? We were still all working through those workshops, but it was pretty apparent that the rules were going to come through in the manner that they did, to have that ability to seek the additional delta. But because of the timing, again, of the due date for that program, my push to the company to look at some of these routes and include them really required that we just looked at our own assets and our own abilities. We didn't have the opportunity to look at third-party leases. We did look at some other things such as, radio and such, but the NTIA program really, and even, these upcoming other broadband programs such as BEAD are really focusing on fiber. Not to say that fixed wireless broadband and even some of these other terrestrial types of services aren't capable or eligible, but there certainly is a focus on fiber. So we didn't look at the ability to interconnect with someone else to maybe utilize some other facilities. And so that would be a reason why we may not go forward if NTIA doesn't select these or any of these. Because we certainly couldn't then say, well, we still have to go.
Tim, are you there?
I'm losing you, Tim.
Oh, there isn't a fiber cut between him and us.
Somebody gave him, he gave him some time.
That was the one called for, sorry. Tim, are you there?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so for some reason, my computer just decided that it wanted me to use my AirPods now. So, so I'm not sure where you lost me, but in looking at these projects, if the NTIA doesn't support them, I'm not sure that we can go forward with them, just because we wouldn't be able to really answer the question of what other alternatives did you look at? What other options are there? We only looked at our own because of the timing of it all. I know there are opportunities for fiber in the Phillips County area. So coming from Ray up to Julesburg, as our proposal is. I know there's some fiber down in southeast Colorado, potentially anyway, from a company called CCOM. And then, we may even have some opportunities through CDOT fiber through the tunnel, and actually it could even come from an outfit called Project Thor, which is Northwest Colorado, government-owned middle mile network. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it. So, Joe, to answer your question, I mean, that while I would appreciate, you saying, hey, we want you to go forward with this, I think if NTA doesn't support it, we wouldn't be able to truly answer the question of, is this the best opportunity the state has absent NTIA, the way you presented it? And, a reasonable answer to that could be maybe not.
Well, I think we're pleased that you looked at this opportunity to use NTIA grant funds and not put all the burden on our constituents. We need to close these single points of failure, and it's going to take time over time to do that. And I think part of my concern, as we've mentioned before and during the rulemaking proceeding, is that when you have a single point of failure, you have a line gets cut and people can't reach 911, that's when people die. And it's important that we start getting these corrected. And I wouldn't want to delay yet another year to get started. And looking at the pricing of what it would reflect in the 911 surcharge from your response to my email, it doesn't seem that unreasonable for what we get, the number of PSAPs that we improve redundancy to, or diversity. Sure. And I don't know that if we got a grant and you might be able to use different fiber in some areas than is planned in this grant program, that change couldn't be made. If we have the routes approved and we find other methods to do it, that we couldn't still go forward with it. So that would be my preference, is
Sure.
that we have the ability to discuss this as a community and decide if we want to go forward with this or not. And
Yeah,
unless
yeah.
you're saying that you wouldn't go forward even if we wanted you to.
No. It certainly wouldn't be a unilateral decision. How about that? But I could see with losing the 70% funding, and the structure in which we have proposed to build those routes. Yeah, we may just have to have a conversation before we say, let's either amend it. And that, again, timing wise could cause some issues. I know we're going to be pushing up against the deadline for the commission to establish the next year's statewide surcharge rate. So that certainly is another factor, but it won't be unilateral. I will certainly commit to that. It won't be a unilateral, well, we didn't get it, so we're just yanking it. But it's definitely going to have it could have an impact on how and if we go forward. And I certainly think it's a shared conversation.
I don't want to take up too much more time, but I think if you do schedule a meeting aside from this to talk about this proposal, I'd like to discuss and have more questions about this particular issue.
Sure.
Joe, your hand's still up. Do you have anything else, or was that it?
No, in the past, on some of these systems, when I start talking, it automatically goes down.
Anyone else? Thank you, Tim.
You're very welcome.
This is Jennifer. Thank you, Tim. We'll move on to Entrado, which I don't think, unless someone joined after roll call, I don't think we have an Entrado rep on the call. And so we'll move on to bylaws and Kimberly.
Thanks, Jennifer. This is Kimberly. I know I submitted my written report, but we do need a little discussion about it. And that has to do with modifying the bylaws to add another seat for 988. So I did reach out to the bylaws committee with this request, receive feedback. Everyone is in support of adding another seat. But the question is, another seat, or how do we allocate that seat for 988? And then also the timing around adding that new member. Do we wait until the calendar year when we have our voting cycle for members? So we wait till we have attrition in the membership, in the voting membership, and then we add the 988 seat, or do we try to do something now today? So taking the feedback from the voting committee members, of the bylaws committee, the recommendation is for 988. And then also it was not a preference one way or the other, whether we take a seat from 911 and make it 988, or if we add in another member, which would give us equal number of voting members, which we typically aren't in a contentious arm wrestle situation when we take votes. So I'm not worried about odd versus even to make that recommendation. So really the bylaws is open for discussion from the voting members about a preference on that. But we do have a change. We have full support of adding 988. It's just, where do we want to add that seat? Wait for attrition, take that from the 911 committee members, or just add another seat and bring us up to 30 voting members. And then timing, the recommendation, it's not urgent by any means. So the recommendation could be, if we're adding a 30th seat, we just add it immediately. If we're going to wait for attrition in the voting cycle, we would do that at the end of the year and then add it next year. So I guess I put it up for comments or concerns, or from our chair, if you have any preference.
I have no preference. I'm interested in hearing others' thoughts though.
I mean, I'm concerned about pulling away from 911. I think it would be a different story if we didn't have 911 participation.
We always fill our seats.
Yeah. If we had a seat or something that we were filling, I think that'd be different. But we also do have other, seats on there that we have a difficult time filling.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to kick somebody off of a seat. And in fact, I think if we added another seat to keep it odd for 911, we'd probably not have any trouble filling that, would we?
Not usually. Does anybody have a concern with timing? If we add another seat, we can edit those bylaws, add 988 right away. And then vote on the bylaw changes for our next meeting. And that would, again, would bring us up to 30, or we could keep it odd. We just don't have contentious issues that we're trying to do tiebreakers for any of our voting members, so.
This is Daryl. I'll just add that we have really good turnout, but we never get 100% of all members turning out. So if it's an even number of people, I don't think that's really going to have an impact on tiebreaker votes.
Could work out the other way.
Yeah, it could.
And I look at it, if we are that close on an issue, we may need to do more homework on that issue as well. I mean, if we get to that point where we're debating and we're close, then what are we debating? What are we close on? And what subcommittee or what other meetings do we need to have to try and move that forward?
Is there a reason not to add an additional 911 seat in addition to the 988?
We already have 17 positions for 911. So from a vendor perspective, we already have 17 seats for 911 on the task force.
When we added the community at large, was that a new position or did it replace one? Do anybody recall?
I don't recall. I think we've got 16 911 positions right now.
I think I may have typed that wrong.
Well, I remember looking at the roster just yesterday and counting it up, so I think that's correct.
I'm sitting in 17 in my head, but Carl, I think that was a new position we added when we did the member at large.
So we've been at even before. I think Matt raised your hand.
Yeah, I'm okay either way. I have another bylaws issue to point out that Daryl and I talked about, I think, last week.
No, sorry. Sorry, Matt, if it's a red line, it's your editabilities. We'll take it. If it's content, I don't know.
Well, no, it surrounds the issue of when a voting member holds a position but leaves their employer and is no longer that voting member. It looks like there's just some legacy language that might need to be cleaned up on that.
Okay. And for the task force, we've been making fixes, but we haven't reviewed the bylaws to make sure that we're current in every category all the way through. So we made some changes last year. So it may be time, if we're going to make this change, that we really rewrite and review all of the bylaws for any of the legacy pieces and take the time to do it versus just patching some of these things together. So what we can do is have some bylaws meetings and really start word by word, sentence by sentence, and go through and see if there's other things that are legacy, and add another seat for 988, get that back in front of the voting members for our next meeting, if that sounds like a good plan forward. I see nods here. Does anybody have a concern with that approach? So Matt, we can take a look at your legacy language.
Yeah, I'll forward the email discussion to you for that committee.
That would be great. Thanks, Matt.
Mhm.
I don't see why we couldn't add 988 today and then also go forward with the thorough review.
Well, one outstanding question Kimberly had was whether if we do add 988, is it immediate or is it at the next voting cycle? I think that was one of your questions.
Right.
And if it's at the next voting cycle, then we have time. So that's the only reason I bring it up.
We could vote to make it immediate. It's whatever we vote on.
Is there not a requirement for presentation of the red line at one meeting and voting at the next?
We could do a presentation of the red line virtually through email to the voting members so they have eyes on it. and then cover it and then vote on it all in the same meeting. So it's just the notice of the document before the meeting.
Okay.
We wouldn't want to spring it on anybody.
Yeah, so in the bylaws, the only requirement for amendment of the bylaws is that it be done by 2/3 vote of the voting members. The 2/3 vote of the voting members who are present at a meeting.
So we don't have a critical item in front of this task force today that making a voting member change today without reviewing the bylaws, I think is critical in nature. So my recommendation would be that we redline, clean up the bylaws, reconsider all of that and get them back in front of you for consideration for our next meeting, if that works. And it sounds like everyone is in agreement of adding 988. So we have no concern there and the revisions would reflect that. Okay, thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Kimberly. This is Jennifer, and then next up we have Legislative Committee. Jackie Louise, are you on?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Kind of.
Sorry, I'm kind of out of pocket. Let me see if I could do something a little bit different. Hold on.
Sound better.
It's better now.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I just have to hold the phone right. The Legislative Committee, you see my written report. I want to thank everyone for their hard work on misuse of 911. We are not giving up. We will continue to strive for it. And there are other items on our agenda coming up as well. The one thing that the committee wanted to ask today was the CPAT comments. We wanted to know if the task force wants us as a group to actually file some comments on this or just provide comments to authority boards. And so I do need a decision from the task force.
So Jackie, we had talked about maybe you, the legislative committee having a special meeting following this one. Were you still planning on doing that today?
Yes, that's correct. I just wanted to kind of get marching orders on which direction we're headed from the task force. Do we want to file comments on behalf of the task force, or do we just simply want to put the comments together for the authority boards and publish them out to the authority boards?
Thoughts or comments?
Wasn't there some discussion that the entire board needed or board needed to vote on these comments before they?
This is Jennifer, and yes, that's.
Yes, the task,
Go ahead, Jackie.
which is why we wanted to meet today, that if the task force wants us to provide comments on behalf of the task force, we could put them together, get them out by email, and the task force can vote by email, is my understanding.
We were going to do it at the end of this meeting so that I could step out of the room. This is not an adjudicated proceeding yet, but I don't want anyone later to be able to accuse me of favoritism for listening to arguments before they're filed or something along those lines.
I
That
think you
makes
guys
sense.
are in the best position to put those comments together and pass it on to the group rather than individually expecting the PSACs to do it. So it makes sense.
And what you could do, Jackie, if you go down that road, if the legislative committee puts together comments, according to our bylaws, they do have to be approved by the full task force, but I could send you the voting member roster and you could send it out to that list, not including myself, and get a vote that way.
That would be great. So is the task force in favor of us filing on behalf of the task force? Once they see them, of course, they would approve them.
I'd say that's the direction.
This is Kimberly. I think it's hard for me to say because I know we're going to be working on comments with the CCOA and we have 30 911 authorities at the CCOA. And so it just, again, it'll be about content and what the comments are. So I wouldn't want to vote on something on the task force that could be in conflict with the CCOA says. So I think what the content is on of the comments will make our decision on our vote if it goes forward.
Well, I think that's why it needs to be done.
And the task force represents industry, and so it'd be really interesting to hear the industry's perspective on that comment as well versus from a 911 perspective. I would love to hear what our industry partners think about those things.
I agree. Okay. So we will go ahead with our meeting right after this meeting to kind of formulate comments. We could form and we could finish them up on our Monday meeting. We could put them out to the university and they can decide then if they want to buy out half of the task force, correct?
Carl, did you have something to add?
No.
Sounds like a good plan, Jackie. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay, this is Jennifer. Moving on to 988. Do we have Kelly on the line? Okay, moving on to Equal Access Committee, and Cheryl did provide a report, but I think it got put in while we were meeting. So if we could just scroll through the report slowly, thank you. Great, thank you, Daryl. So I did have some conversation with Shirley yesterday, and as you can see at the end, she has asked Sarah Shover from South Metro to co-chair from a 911 perspective. So she and Cheryl will be working together on these trainings and bringing some recommended action steps to the task force in the coming year. So if anybody has any questions or thoughts or comments?
I would just add that this committee is going to really be looking at filling in, as I mentioned with our presenter Matthew earlier, this committee is going to be looking at filling in gaps in available training for telecommunicators on how to best handle 911 calls from people with disabilities. We have not traditionally had a lot of 911 participation in this committee. It's been mostly people from the disabled community, which is great, but we need both sides of the equation on that to be able to develop the training that's going to be useful for the PSAPs. So I really encourage anyone, it doesn't have to be you, if you've got somebody at your PSAP who's really passionate about training or is interested in this issue, they could get involved and start participating and helping to develop this training. And Jennifer, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but we've also talked about maybe talking to the Training Standards Institute about possibly helping out with this as well, because we want it to be really good quality, but also make it something that doesn't cost anything at the PSAP level and is available on demand.
That's fine. Thank you, Daryl. Okay, this is Jennifer. Moving on. Oh, Joe, go ahead, Joe. Joe, are you muted?
Sorry. I also understood some of the concerns at the accessibility committee meeting that the people who are kind of have a PSAP connection in those meetings are Daryl, who previously, of course, supervised and worked in PSAPs, and me, who, you know, I'm not a PSAP type. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a person who can really provide the perspective of the PSAP. Patty has agreed, Patty West, to attend, but it would also be helpful if we had other people in those meetings to provide the perspective of PSAPs, not just in training, but in just general discussions of issues that need to be addressed.
This is Jennifer. Thank you, Joe, for bringing that up. And we would love to have more 911 participation. So thank you, Patty, for committing. And the next Equal Access Committee meeting is May 25th. And I think it was, if you scroll up just a tiny bit, we're into Cheryl's
I'm going the wrong way, aren't I?
Yeah, because I don't remember what time. 2 to 3
Yeah.
on Google Meets. And that link is on the PUC task force page. So as Daryl said, if you have those who are passionate in your PSAP about this topic, we would love to have more 911 participation. So thank you for pointing that out, Joe.
Yeah, and to Joe's point, I always attend those meetings, but it's been well over a decade since I've taken a 911 call. So we really need some current practitioners to participate.
Excellent, thank you. Outage Committee, Tina, any highlights or further information to provide, or Daryl, since you guys are kind of co-leading that right now?
Not for me, just what's in the report. Daryl's really handling the new investigation process, and then the outage committee will investigate anything outside of those parameters. But outside that, I don't think I have anything. Daryl, do you?
Yeah, I'll just say that there's still one outstanding outage from before the new rules went into place that I'm continuing to handle just because I was still chair of the committee when we started the investigation. That's the outage that it's from way back in September of last year that affected San Miguel County and to some extent Montrose and Ouray. So we're still following up with Tim on that as he gets more information internally as to what's happening there. I'm hoping that we can wrap that one up fairly soon. There have been several new investigations that have outages that have taken place since the new rules went into place. And outage investigations have started under the new procedure that is in the rules. It's Rule 2143K, if anyone has a copy of the rules and they want to look it up. Otherwise, I can send it to you if you're interested in reading those. And I should have included that as part of my PUC report, but I will do that starting with the July meeting. I'll start including a summary of where we're at on any outstanding outage investigations through the commission. Right now, we're just in the phase where we have sent those investigation forms to Tim so that he can put together responses, and the standard is a 30-day response unless they request a extension. So I'll keep everybody up to date on what we find out with those as they progress.
This is Jennifer. Thank you, Daryl. Any questions on that? Okay, moving on to reports committee. Looks like nothing much to report there, or questions? Okay, EZNet Users Group, Kathy, any highlights or any questions for Kathy on her report?
No highlights.
Okay, any questions for Kathy? Okay, moving on to GIS committee. Any questions for Matt or highlights for Matt?
Nothing to add. It's pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, moving on to, looks like we had public safety broadband, waiting on a report, PSCS. Randy or Deanie, are you on? Okay.
This is Connie. They did not have a PSCS meeting after the radio summit this month.
Perfect. Thank you, Connie. Okay, moving on to the SWIC. Thank you, Amanda, for the report. And does anybody have any questions for Amanda? Hearing none. Moving on to Division of Fire Prevention and Control. Any questions for Connie? Either on Division of Fire Prevention or the Resource Center update. Connie, anything further to add?
Maybe just an update on that Senate Bill 2318. It never made it out of the House Appropriations Committee.
Well, that's unfortunate.
This is Daryl. I'll just add that my understanding is that the issue that came out, and I wish it had come out sooner so that it could have been addressed. But the issue that came out at the last minute was that some of the committee members didn't feel like there was enough oversight in the bill to make sure that the resource center was spending money in according with state rules and that it was being spent in the public interest. So I think it's entirely possible that the same interim committee that produced the bill in the first place and got it introduced may do it again next year with additional oversight built into the bill so that it addresses those concerns. But I can't say at this time because I haven't talked to the leadership of that interim committee.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Connie. Moving on to Rapid SOS update. Do we have Karen? Okay, thank you. And thank you, Kimberly, for the CCOA update. Any highlights or questions for Kimberly?
No highlights. Happy to answer any questions.
I think with, when they did the 911 abuse bill, part of the way through, they added a bunch of stuff, started a new study. And I mean, that kind of scared me. Luckily, they pulled that out, but I think it kind of goes back to the usefulness of CCOA and that we're a little bit more free to lobby and stuff against stuff like that.
That's a great point, Carl. So yeah, if you aren't aware what the CCOA is, please take a look. Go to our website and just being 911 authorities, 911 authority boards coming together and tackling issues. So we've been doing a lot of good work as it relates to these regulatory issues, filings, comments, and just collaborating effort.
Excellent. Thank you, Kimberly. Okay,
That's it.
that brings us up to our break.
Great.
No.
So lunch is here.
We still have new and old business, I think.
Oh.
Unless you wanted to.
My agenda says break for lunch.
Oh, okay.
But we can do whatever you want, Daryl.
No. If lunch is here, maybe it would be a good time to break for lunch, then we can come back and then do old and new business, just like the agenda says. If I had looked at it before talking.
So lunch is here. I'll get some cups out for water in the refrigerator. There are some cans of soda and some like a sparkling drink or something in the refrigerator. So please help yourself. And if you want coffee, let me know and I'll make a pot of coffee. But please go out, grab some food and we'll just come back. You can eat in here. So feel free, bring your food back in and we'll rejoin.
Thank you.
And for those of you on the webcast, I'm going to mute the room. We're not going anywhere, but just keep your Zoom open. And when we're ready to start up again, I'll unmute.
How long do you want to break? 11:45. Do you want to come back at noon or?
Yeah, if we're bringing our food back in here.
Okay, we'll start up again at noon.
Copy that, standing by.
you know.
We are unmuted.
Okay, Mr. Jennifer, we'll get back into it. Welcome back. I don't see any old business on the agenda. Does anybody have anything to add under old business? Okay, moving on to new business, and this is more of a discussion point than anything else, but the Colorado Resource Center back in 2014 or maybe 2015 did a series of ENP study group videos back in the day before Zoom and all the online meeting options, and made those available open source, and they have been used by hundreds of people who have gone on to get their ENP. However, that's a little bit a while ago, and Nina has updated the body of knowledge and their materials since then to incorporate a lot of changes in technology. And so I just wanted to get a feel from this group to see if there's any interest in having someone or some entity visit those study group and refresh and review those study group videos. We'll throw it open for thoughts.
So this is Kimberly. I think so. I still get called and talk to people about the one that I recorded when I did the network piece of it, and it is outdated. And so I think that I've heard from people over the years that they loved them and they used them and it helped them take the test. So I think if we were able to break it up and do different chapters and put it out there in the 911 community to say who would want to take a lead and walk through and record it, that would be great. So I think it's a great way to support someone's 911, like doing some mentoring. Excellent job. Thank you, Kimberly. Anybody else?
Hey, Jennifer, Carl Simpson. Mission Critical has recorded all of their preparation files and put them out there for anybody to use, and they're updated. They're done professionally, and I'm pretty sure they'd be willing to extend the invitation to this group to use their files. So they have note pages, they have PowerPoints, and then they have presenters. So it's pretty slick. And in the last year, we've gotten 6 new EMPs in Colorado Springs.
Perfect.
Using their stuff. So I would be willing to reach out to them. There's no objection to see if we can get those posted. Probably on a resource base.
Yes, so I guess the question would be, would it be better for us to update our own or maybe just provide links to what Mission Critical has done, since they're already keeping those up to date?
Yeah, to keep them current. Because it's a requirement of their employees to have an EMP if they're going to work in this industry.
I like that idea to go through what's worked well for your agency and for your people. If it's already there and done, I think that's fantastic. I'd love to take a look.
And I don't think, Vicky, are you on the call today? Vicky Pickett? So Vicky's not on the call today. She's the president of the Resource Center Board right now. So the Resource Center Board has been meeting pretty consistently every month. So I can bring this up at the next Resource Center Board meeting, and maybe what we'll do is just take down the outdated material that we have and put up links to what Mission Critical has, or maybe the Resource Center Board will have some other ideas.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Thank you, Carl. Okay, this is Jennifer. We're now at open discussion. Does anybody have anything for open discussion?
I have one item. We're working with Jackson County on a regionalization project. And I went on site to help make sense of some reports they were having with issues in the 911 network. And what I found is that they have 2 subsessions, and when they dial the third 911 call comes in, it rings fast busy. It doesn't roll over. And working with Lumen on that, its actual setting that was intentionally applied, probably approved by the PSAP at the time of the EZUNet project. So I'm not assuming that Lumen applied anything wrong. But that was the behavior, is that it was set to the third one, ring fast busy. So it was a default and it still hasn't been changed. So it takes time and a form that has to be completed, and we're working through all that for Jackson. But I just encourage everybody to maybe do some testing, maybe even visit with Lumen and ask what your settings are to make sure what you know is going to happen when you fill your SIP session. So it's that default behavior when all of your SIP sessions are filled with 911 calls. So you have 6, if you have 12, what happens with that 13th call? What happens with that 7th call? So you may have thought it was one behavior at the time of the migration, and maybe it was. So it's just kind of good to have that confirmation, because of course Jackson did not understand that theirs was going to go to fast busy. And then the other piece of it that we found is what happens at that timer threshold. When at the EZNet side, we had talked through this and what that default timer is, which means a ring, no answer. And at the selective router, the IP selective router, there's a default timer of 2 minutes, meaning it can ring at your PSAP for 2 minutes before it will roll to your backup PSAP. So in the EZNet project, that's the default. You had a choice to change that to a different threshold. So for Lita, we changed all of ours to 20 seconds. That's standard with what happens on our Viper side. At Jackson County, what the behavior is it rings for a minute on one SIP session. And if it doesn't answer, it rolls to the next SIP session and rings for another minute. Then at 122 seconds, 121 seconds, it rolls to their backup. So you're talking about 2 minutes of a ring before it will go to the backup. So again, these are all settings that you can have changed. They weren't aware, those are default settings. So if you didn't specify in the EZNet project, and if you never regrouped after the EZNet project, you may have some unattended behavior in the system that you're not aware of. So since we found this last week, and it really isn't a problem in the network, it's a problem with the configuration that was agreed to. So I just encourage everybody to maybe do some testing back at your PSAP.
I'll make sure that gets brought up at the next EZNet users group meeting too.
I was gonna bring it up.
It seems to me that, we have the reliability and contingency report, which has the numbers that it rolls to. Maybe with moving to the EZNet, we need to update the requirements or update that report so that it includes these sort of settings that when they send their contingency plan and PSAPs can get them to review the contingency filing, they can see if they need to update their settings.
This is Kimberly. Joe, I think that's a fantastic idea, because Daryl, you probably want to see on if a PSAP selected default ring no busy, ring busy. Because then that could be follow-up. It may be that they didn't even know that that was the default. So it would be great to have eyes so we can work with each other to say, hey, did you realize what this setting means? And there's other settings that you could have selected.
And this is Daryl, I can't recall right now what is all required in the rules for that contingency report, but I do think it makes sense to include rollover arrangements. And I wasn't even aware that there was an option for a timeout arrangement. So that would be good to include as well.
And it's the time, but then the behavior of the time. So you could just say after you ring on one SIP session, roll to the backup. But so Lita has 46 911 SIP sessions. Could you imagine?
Yeah.
A minute, a minute, a minute, a minute, a minute. That would be a problem. So those thresholds are critically important.
Matt, you have your hand up?
Yeah, pondering this discussion and trying to recollect, isn't it possible for a PSAP to check its current settings in the Intrado user portal, the IUP?
Matt, you have a really good memory. We did receive training on, I think that 120-minute threshold on a report in there.
Yeah.
I want to say it was in the old IUP, not in the new report.
I think one of the, so not obviously 911 net, like the old logging in, but if you go to the IUP, one of the items in the left menu column should get you to where you can see your current settings for this.
So Matt, this is Daryl. I do recall that. In fact, at one point I tried to build a table that showed who was rolling over to whom, and even with the help of a CenturyLink employee, it was not user-friendly to interpret by any means, but
Right.
something we could get some help on from either CenturyLink or Intrado on how to interpret that.
Okay, anybody else on that?
So I saw Vicky Pickett is on the call. She just stepped away for a minute and she just asked if she missed anything. So Vicky, what we were talking about earlier was, and I'll bring this up at the next Resource Center board meeting, was the idea of either redoing the ENP classes that we have on there because they're a decade old now and they're out of date, or maybe replacing those with links to the ENP study group sessions that Mission Critical Partners has done, because they have, according to Carl Simpson, they have really good materials up and they keep it up to date. So we might just refer to theirs instead of redoing our own, but there'll be a discussion for the Resource Center board.
Excellent. Yeah, my understanding is the Mission Critical Partners is like got the best success rate of the study groups that are out there. But you know, I will say last time when we had these posted, they were a go-to, and I don't think I necessarily think we need to shy away from that. So I think it'll be a good discussion for sure.
Maybe it's a both approach where we do our own as well as provide links to Mission Critical so that people can get two different perspectives.
Yeah, I agree.
So Carl, this is Jennifer. I have a question because I haven't seen the Mission Critical ones. Is it like a presentation without a question and answer period, or is it live with a question and answer period?
They do both. They record a live session, and then once the recording or the class is over, they post their recording.
Okay, great. I didn't know if maybe that would be helpful to have like an in-person and incorporate student questions.
Yeah, they really do excellent work, and then just that they offer that is wonderful.
Yeah, it really is. Perfect, thank you. And thank you, Kimberly, for bringing that up.
Jennifer, I had a question to ask. This is Patty, and then maybe this is more for the Resource Center. I don't know if there's anybody looking at for all the staffing issues that people are having, what success or people using something different? Is paying higher actually working as a recruitment tool? I don't even know where I'm going with it, other than it just seems like a topic that we might be able to collectively, even if it's anecdotal kind of information, to see, to help each other out, to try and figure that out.
And I saw that Connie was on the line. Looks like Connie's still on the line. Connie, do you have anything? Have you had any discussions with any of the PSAPs about this? Or I don't think we're still doing our PSAP roundtables that we used to do, the ECC roundtables, but I'm sure that was a topic of discussion there. So I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, the only thing I can really add is the pay is so tied to what your location is. Our more rural areas have the lower pay, and they also have it look like a pretty high turnover rate. Higher pay seems to kind of be working into the system as it gets out. But I think that what's happening is, as a discussion we had in the board at the directors in the conference, trying to improve what the public sees as what our profession is. And that's going to take some time. I don't know that it doesn't look like pay's had a little bit of a bump, but it's not getting what we as in the profession for a long time has hoped it would produce.
And one thing we talked about at the last Resource Center board meeting was having the Resource Center publish a salary study or a series of salary studies for maybe for different regions of the state, showing what the averages are, so that if a PSAP does want to try to increase their pay, they'll have some data that they can take to their authority board or to their command management to see if they can do that.
That would be great. And this is Jennifer. I'm gonna put Carl on the spot a little bit because he's been fully staffed for a while. And do you have any success to share with Patty?
I think Gina gives a good overview, but I think part of it is a lot of different things. I think pay helps a lot. But part of it is also, I mean, our hiring process, because we advertise on things like Facebook. We don't do it in the newspaper anymore. And we do paid advertisements. And then through the hiring process, we try to keep it somewhat short. But we also do home visits with people. So not only is the new employee learning what the job's gonna be like, but their family's gonna learn that they're gonna be, with the home away on holidays. And stuff like that. And then we also have with a partnership with the sheriff's office is a peer support group, and I think that's helpful. I think the problem we're running into now is because we don't get a lot of turnover, is there's not a lot of advancement for people.
Tina
For the
Powell.
most part, we've been, staffed for 5 years. We'll lose like 1 or 2 people. Last year we added 2 people, but one of them was a new position. And we're getting 44 plus applicants every time we advertise. The lowest we've ever gotten, I think, was 20. And when I discussed that with one of the police chiefs, he was amazed we were getting that many, even though I was like, oh, I thought that was a horrible number. But I think also advertising, because we don't advertise in the newspaper like we used to. We just try to see people that maybe aren't really looking for a job, but they see that and maybe apply for it.
Tina Powell says in the chat that she knows a few of us are attending the Staffing Crisis Summit next week. Maybe we can bring something, brief the group at the next meeting, just a thought. Jackie Reynolds says, I will be attending that conference and agree that we can report back to the task force at the next meeting. So that would be good information.
And Gina's giving a presentation at that conference. I think you are too, aren't you? Or
No, not at next week. Gina's presenting next week though, right? That's the ACO staffing crisis.
Right,
summit.
well, Tina, I think is actually presenting as well.
Yeah. So we have some,
Yeah, the whole summit is about this topic. So
right.
it'd be good to get a briefing on that.
It's a great question, Patty. Does anybody else have anything to add?
This is Jody. One of the things that Denver has been doing, we have an academy of 29 now. It's the largest in Denver's history. It brings our staffing up to the 90s%. Not effective. We're still in the 50-60% effective, but climbing. And one of the things that we've been doing this time around is working very closely with our recruiting team. And I know for, when you need to hire as many people as we needed to hire, it helps. When you're only hiring 2 or 3, it's a little bit more difficult to do it. But throughout the entire process, the recruiting team would reach out weekly to each one of the applicants. So the ones that did get a conditional offer a few months before the academy, it was just kind of a way to keep them on the hook. Reach out to them weekly. The management team, we all did videos, basically welcome videos, and sent those out to those applicants and just keep them on the hook until day 1. So they kind of feel like they're still involved and aren't just kind of put on the back burner. So that was a pretty successful tactic for us. So.
This is Jennifer. Thank you, Jody. Anybody else?
Couple brief updates before we adjourn.
Go ahead.
We're still under open business. So one is I have still been working on the recruitment process for the new 911 program manager. It was very slow getting the job posting approved and posted, but once it got posted, we've been moving fairly quickly. The only main thing that's been holding me back this week is just the fact that I've been in the conference most of the week and here today, so I haven't been able to call references and things like that. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to have that filled fairly soon. I also wanted to note that those of you who knew our previous director of the PUC, Doug Dean, he retired back at the end of November, beginning of December, and they have just appointed a new director for the PUC. She's very interested in what we're doing. Her background, like it usually is when the PUC is involved, when they appoint commissioners and they hire directors, they're looking for an energy background because that's the majority of what the PUC does, and telecom is usually a secondary thought. But she is very interested in knowing what we do and what the PUC's involvement in 911 is. And she will probably be attending our next meeting in July. So I wanted to let people know about that. And I think that's great because the more interest we can get from the rest of the PUC, the more potential resources we'll have in the future, not necessarily in terms of money, but in terms of other things that we want to do as a task force. So just wanted to let people know about that. And I'll keep you updated on whether she's going to attend the July meeting or not.
So at the next meeting, don't say what we really think about you.
Yes, absolutely. And I can also give you my my direct supervisor's contact information if you ever want to provide feedback. I'm fine with that.
Thank you, Daryl. Anything else? Anything else under open discussion? Okay, well, our next meeting is July 13th. Is that an in-person?
It will be a hybrid like this. We have it tentatively planned for Montrose, so I will be reaching out to Montrose between now and then to see if we can get a meeting room set up. And if not, we may have to move it, but I don't want to, they're not necessarily on the hook if they can't do it still, but that's what we had tentatively planned on.
We all need to go visit Matt. He always attends every meeting, virtually, of course, but
Yes.
we need to go over there.
Yeah, Southwest Colorado, I think, doesn't get a whole lot of love in terms of in-person meetings, so it'd be really good to visit down there.
It's all good.
You don't walk.
We need to see if he's really in Montrose and not on a beach someplace or something.
Yeah, I think he's dialing into these meetings from Guam. I always use that virtual background, so we can't tell where he really is.
Oh, you're giving it away, man.
All right. If we have no further business, then I will adjourn this meeting at 12:22. But as a reminder, if you'd like to stay on with the legislative subcommittee and discuss comments on the CPAP, you're more than welcome to stay.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording for this meeting, but we'll leave the bridge open. We'll leave the Zoom meeting open so that you guys can discuss the CPAP stuff. Again, this is because we only have one 911 person at the PUC right now. I'm going to leave the room so you can discuss, and I'll just have one of you let me know when you guys are done discussing.
And then I wanted to just offer it out before anybody leaves. If you want a tour of the building, I'm happy to give you a tour of this floor that's ours and into the back of PSAP. So let me know. You're good with the tour? So I don't know, were you gonna stay for this conversation about CPAP? No?
And I wasn't planning.
No, I'll do, Tracy can take notes for me and I can do a tour for anybody who's interested. And then if you're staying for CPAP, I can do a second tour for anybody who's interested.
Thank you for hosting. For those who aren't here, it's a beautiful facility.
Absolutely. So tour number one, what do you got here?
I'll be stopping the recording now, but everyone who wants to stay for the CPAP discussion, please stay on the line.